Hiya, hiya. Well, it's another one of those great sultry days. I'm a little tired. I got to be honest about it. I took a nap. It began in April, and it's now almost Labor Day. So this is quite a long nap I'm taking. I think the whole country's asleep anyway. But then, too, some people are not asleep. You know, we've got blackouts and cop-outs. We got all kinds of outings for people who are supposed to distance themselves. I try to stay away from people I don't like or who are what they call toxic. You know, I mean, you notice that Jay Sorensen is not on the show today, not because he's toxic, but because Jay is essentially a music guy. And when we have music guests on, I always have Jay on. But today we got a guy who's probably is a comics comic. And well, that's one of his titles. But the other thing that'll frighten the bejesus out of Jay is he's a dentist by trade. and Jay, if you notice when he talks, he smiles without showing his teeth. Some people are very self-conscious about that, you know. And I've had really good experience with dentists. My now ex-wife is she's a hygienist. She still stayed in the game of pulling teeth, and she doesn't do that. I mean, they do that. I was going to open a place where you'd actually clean teeth and have your nails done. It was going to be called Tooth and Nail. It was a place that I opened in L.A., but we had a little bit of a problem because in L.A. at the time, in California, in order to clean teeth, you had to have a dentist on the premises. A dentist had to be in the office. It was a law. So I said, well, if you have a foot ache and you have if you have someone working on your feet, which is very common, and you have a manicure and a pedicure, do you need to have a podiatrist there? No, that's because it's a strong lobby, you know. But anyway, I wanted to put the two together. I always thought that would be good, you know, to have people after work come over, get your teeth done and your feet. Teeth and feet, tooth and nail. It was good. It was a good concept. And we were going to do that in Watts, you know, which is the inherently the black section of Los Angeles at the time. It's central, South Central. And I was going to call it the Black Tooth or something like that. I forgot. I was in trouble. Whatever it was going to be, it was in trouble. I'm always in trouble anyway because I say all the things that are in my little pea brain. But, you know, this show here is okay because if you don't like it, all you got to do is not listen or watch it. That's the great thing about something when it's not a public broadcast, because a public broadcast usually has a sponsor. You piss off the sponsor and you don't have the show anymore. You know, and if you're on a regular format, if you piss off the audience, then you don't have an audience anymore, but you still have the show. You know, but try doing one without a sponsor. So what I've done here is I've tried to present something that's a little bit different, where you should really take this show as it is now and listen to it at another time. Not a podcast. I mean, they call it a podcast. A podcast, there's no money in them anyway. It's bull. The money is really in where you have a sponsor, and somebody has to pay for it. You know, you notice we don't have a sponsor here. So this is all volunteer work. Now, the only way that we can get away with this is because of Zoom and some of the things that have made us, I would say, the enemy of the government. It's the internet. You know, the government hates the internet because they can't control it. They not everybody in the government, but you know, as a rule, there's no FCC. You know, what are they going to do? We lost them a long time ago. You know, the guy that's the head of the FCC now, I don't think he even has a radio. I don't think he's ever watched TV. I think he climbs a tower and changes the bulb. You know, they don't have anybody that you could really, really depend on who's running the broadcast business of the country. Otherwise, you wouldn't have two people that own all the stations. You know, I mean, I look at the idea here that we're on a radio and television show that's a simulcast, and on this program is one of the really good career change guys. As I mentioned earlier, he was a dentist, and he came over and he decided, you know, dentistry was a little too dull. As a matter of fact, that's what DDS stands for, duller than dog shit. So he was a dentist, and he decided that he was going to get out of that and get into show business. and he has become the friend of all the comics. That's only one place. But another thing about Jeff Gurian, who is, you're probably seeing his face now, is he has nice hair. You know, I mean, that all comes from not living well and being very spiritual. I think one of the other things about Jeff that I recall was that, this in the back of my head, Jeff used to write for the Weekly World News. You know, those newspaper tabloids that are on the way out, that's not the Inquirer. You know, it's the Globe and the ones that have sensationalism. And as I always remind Jeff, my favorite story that he wrote was about the guy who had wooden pants. That to me, I don't know where you got that from. But I mean, these stories are crazy. They're things about people that the guy that lived in the Batcave actually became a Broadway show. What was that one? Was it Batman or Batboy? Wasn't that?
Yeah, are you talking to me? I don't know if I'm supposed to talk yet.
Oh yeah, well you can talk.
I'm officially introduced. Okay, I didn't know. Yeah, that was from my book, Man Robs Bank with His Chin, and it was you were talking about George Washington, who wore wooden pants. A lot of people thought he had wooden teeth, but the truth was that he had wooden pants, and the fact
he was not a Republican or a Democrat. He was a member of a splinter group.
That's right. Yeah, well, you know, when he chopped down the cherry tree, you know that famous story, it was to get softer wood for his pants. Oh. He had been wearing mahogany pants, and you know how uncomfortable that is.
Oh,
you get splinters. It's crazy. You can't wear mahogany pants. So that's the story behind it, the cherry tree. But what's fun is that you remember it all these years. And when I got started in comedy, when Saturday Night Live was new, I brought my films. I was doing crazy films in the street in those days, in the late 70s. And I did a film about several men were arrested for smearing cream cheese on the ankles of elderly women who wore their stockings rolled down like bagels. You ever see the old women with the stockings? They're rolled down. They look like bagels to me. And I got my dear grandmother to let me put cream cheese on her ankles, and she made believe she had a Jewish accent. And she said, you know, in the Jewish religion, we have two kinds of stockings, one for milk and one for meat. And this crazy man, he smeared cream cheese on my meat stockings, and I can't get it off. So this was one of many films. I brought it up to Alan Zweibel, who was one of the head writers on Saturday Night Live at the time. He's never forgotten it. I spoke to Alan 2 days ago. He's 40 years. He still remembers cream cheese on the ankles. The way you remember George Washington wore wooden pants. Because when you put two things together that don't go together, people remember that.
Well, exactly. You know, Alan Zweibel, as long as you brought him up, was a wonderful friar at the Friars Club.
Oh, absolutely.
He also is a guy who I think he wrote for Andy Kaufman or worked with him. Didn't he do that?
He wrote Billy Crystal's show, 700 Sundays. He worked with Martin Short. I don't know if he worked with Andy Kaufman. He did the book about Gilda Radner because they were so close on the show. He created the Gary Shandling show. He's an award-winning writer, producer, director, and he's the guy that gave me my start in comedy. And
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
He was the first person to see my films, and he didn't just give me a phone number of his manager. He called him on my behalf, which was the nicest thing. A lot of people say, well, here, call this guy, use my name or whatever. But he called him. It was David Jonas. And David Jonas left us a couple of years ago at 100 years old. And he was managing Freddie Prinze at the time and got him the show Chico and the Man. That was thanks to David. And when I first met him, you know, you mentioned the dental thing. That was just a rumor. You know that, right? Yeah, it started the day I graduated from dental school. It never stopped. So David Jonas said to me, what are you, crazy? You're a doctor. What do you want with comedy? It's a crazy business. And he tried to talk me out of it. And I had already been writing comedy since I was 12 years old. I was always a comedy aficionado. And I had met Woody Allen when I was in dental school, and he read my earliest material and encouraged me to make films out of it. So there was no way that I was listening to David. And I spent a year with him learning how to write jokes because I was thinking cream cheese on the ankles I was writing sketches, like crazy sketches.
Yeah.
And so he got me started writing for guys like Dick Capri, you know, and then and all the comics that he handled in those days, they were all Friars. And I got to write for the Friars roast. I was the main writer for the Friars roast for 12 years, from 1978 to 1990.
Well, then you must have written the one. You must have written the one with Trump. We roasted him.
You know what? I was there. I believe I wrote jokes for that. If it happened between 78 and 90, when Bob Sachs was producing the roast, I was there. I wrote the first Chevy Chase roast for Bruce Willis, for Jerry Lewis, for Chuck Scarborough. I worked with all of the roast of the honorees and also people on the dais, you know. So Milton Berle was my sponsor in the Friars Club. How much better can you get than that, right?
Oh boy, he bought that place, you know.
He did. He gave it to the Friars, and because his wife didn't want it. Can you imagine? He buys a townhouse on 55th Street between Park and Madison, and she didn't want it. He told me once he bought her a tiara that was $200,000. They were in France, and he bought it at Van Cleef and Arpels. And he gave it to her, and she didn't like it. And she ran back to the store in a bathrobe, trying to get there before they closed so that she could return it. This is the story that he told me. And she's banging on the window, and the guy opens the door for her. The store's already closed, and she says she wants to return the tiara. And he's shocked. He goes, "Why would you want to return that?" And her answer was, "Because I already have one like it." I have one just like it. So, Milton used to regale me with stories. We used to hang out at the Friars Club when he was in New York. And I'd sit with him, and he'd tell me about his teeth, because he was having very expensive work done on his teeth, and he always wanted my opinion. And
why? Why would he ask you, a non-dentist?
Isn't that something? I don't know. Everyone thought I was a dentist. It was a nasty rumor.
Dr. Gurian. So can we call you doctor? I don't ever remember.
No, I don't like that. I'd rather just, because I'm in the comedy world now, I don't like to confuse the two. When I was writing for Joan Rivers, I thought she knew about my day job because we knew each other from the Friars Club. And one day I got a message asking if I would like to write for Joan Rivers. And I was like, yeah, I would love to write for Joan Rivers, but I thought that she knew of my background because she invited me to her home. And years ago, comedy writers weren't really respected that much. They didn't usually get invited to your home. So I thought she was inviting me as a doctor, not as a comedy writer. So I show up at her house, and she lives in this palatial place, right? And the doorman says to me, "You'll have to wait a little while because she just sprained her ankle and she's in a lot of pain." And I thought to myself, this is great. I can write her a prescription for painkillers. How many comedy writers can write you a prescription for painkillers, right? I thought that this would really get me in good with her. So I finally get to go upstairs. She's with a group of people in her living room, and she introduces me to everyone as Mr. Gurian. So I realized that she didn't know. So I never said a word about it. We got along very well, and she wound up hiring me to be her personal writer. A few months later, I get a call at my dental office in the morning, and my nurse has strict instructions: never interrupt me unless it's for show business. So she comes in and she goes, "Dr. Rivers is on the phone." So I said, okay. I'll take the call. The only one that nobody believed was Dr. Dangerfield. When he would call me, no one believed that there could be a Dr. Dangerfield. So I take the call, and it's Joan, and she's calling me from Vegas, and she says, "What do you do during the day?" And I said, I work. And she said, "Well, obviously you work. What is it that you do?" And I realized that she knew. So I said, is this concerning the vicious rumor going around that I'm a dentist?" And she said, "Well, why didn't you ever tell me?" She loved the idea. She thought it was great. And I said to her, because no one hires you in show business because you're a dentist. They hire you in spite of it. You know? It's not exactly a prerequisite to be a comedy writer. and she thought it was hilarious. And she was such a wonderful person.
Well, she was on the air before me, and I was taking the material that she was with her writers, probably some of your stuff, and I would use it on the air at 2 a.m. Out of the waste paper basket. She caught me. But I went to her house, which is a beautiful apartment. She calls it an apartment, and her home.
Her home.
And I did a joke. I actually did a joke. I said, well, that's a great couch and matching chair, the Che lounge she had. And I said, is it okay to use an occasional chair frequently? It got her.
You know what? Great minds think alike, because I talk about that in my act when I talk about things that are confusing to me. And I said, I went to a store the other day. I saw a sign that said occasional furniture. I'm like, what the heck is occasional furniture? Most of the time it's a sweater, but occasionally it turns into a king-size bed, So it's so funny that we thought the same thing. That happens a lot, by the way, in comedy.
Well, we have it's called stealing. Milton Berle was known for it. Milton Berle would take jokes and use them liberally, and so would Robin Williams. Of course, everybody knew that. You know what?
With Milton Berle, I tend to think, look, I don't know. It took me 2 years of writing for him of begging him, really, before he let me write for him. I didn't know him as a joke stealer. I think that was a reputation that he had. I don't know that was true.
No. He would say that. He said, that's very funny. I'll use it later. That's where that came from.
Right. I think that's where that came from.
I'm not accusing him of being a thief of other people's material. I'm just saying to you that was his rap sheet. It's like Jack Benny with the money.
I was just going to say, Jack Benny was cheap, and Henny Youngman had his thing. And Milton didn't mind people saying that as a joke, but realistically, it took me a couple of years of begging before he let me write for him.
This is how I got into the business because of him. I was a kid in Buffalo, and I went to see him in person, and I was maybe 12. I don't know how, very young. And I went backstage. I had the balls,
Me too.
And he said that. And so he was very kind with me, and I liked him. And he remembered me again when when somebody is so big and they're not thinking about you. They got their own lives, And I thought, gee, that's kind of interesting that he would I was just a kid,
You know what, Joey? I say that all the time. I'm so happy that, we're so on the same page. People ask me when they come to my apartment, I have walls of pictures. I never collected an autograph in my life. I'm not interested in that. But I always say, if you meet a big star and you're in a group of 10 people, they'll say hello to you, but they may not be aware that you're there because there's so many other people. But when you're one-on-one with somebody, unless they're insane, they have to know that you're there. And that's the moment that I would take a picture with them, because that energy was very powerful. It's one-on-one with somebody that I really respected, that I never thought that I would ever meet, that I would ever know them. And so I have hundreds and hundreds of pictures. When I did the book on the comic strip that Chris Rock wrote the introduction for, and when the owner of the comic strip came to my house to talk to me about doing the book, he said to me, "You have more pictures than I have in the club." Because I can't believe, because I think you're the guy to do this book, because it was where Jerry Seinfeld started, and Billy Crystal was the first on stage, and George Wallace and all. And I interviewed them all for the book. Everybody sat down with me, and I wrote this great book called Laughing Legends. And Chris Rock wrote the introduction to it.
And now they're serving spaghetti in that place.
Exactly, isn't that?
But they kept the wall. We fought to keep the wall, which is a comedy. That is the absolute. I would say that wall became the comedy logo. Whenever you saw that wall, you knew you were in for a guy to come out there and tell jokes or work the audience.
Are you talking about the improv or the comic strip?
Well, the improv was on 40-something, 44th,
right? 44th, I think. 44th.
Yeah, that's the one that became Giovanni's. That's the one that became the Spaghetti House.
That's what you were talking about. The comic strip is still there. It's the only one. It's the only club from the 70s that's still in the same location. Unfortunately, all the clubs have been closed for 6 months. Since March.
Yeah, where did I go on 76th Street? What's that one? Stand Up New York.
Stand Up is West 78th.
78th, yeah.
The
I used to
comic
go
strip
there.
is 81st and 2nd.
Yep.
And that was
Well,
like one of my main home clubs. That's the club that I spent.
Well, I've been
so
there
much
with
time.
you, with Maurice and the gang. You know, I like all those guys. I've had them all on my show, and
I'm
and
sure everybody's been on your show.
but I like all those guys. I mean, I love the energy, and I love having them with just to hang out, because it makes for an interesting, entertaining day or evening, or you know, they're great. They're great on the air. Great on the air.
Absolutely. Well, there's no better guest than comedians, even if they're shy and when they're alone. When you put a camera on them, they come to life. The old guys used to do that. Milton Berle and those guys, they lived into their 90s. You know, George Burns, 100. When they'd come out on stage, they'd lose 20 years. You know, they'd come out.
Right.
Don Rickles, he could throw away his cane when he came out on stage. There's something about that adrenaline. When you spend your whole life looking for what's funny, I think that adds to your longevity. It's no accident that all those guys lived well into their 90s. Berle was 93, Youngman was 91, Sid Caesar, I think, was in his 90s.
Yeah, and we've got Jackie Mason.
Jackie Mason,
and we got Pat Cooper. These guys are in their 90s.
Right, and I think Norm Crosby also.
Yeah, so we have a long life. I guess you and I better start being funny.
I guess so. I'm working on it.
You're great. You're right. Great stuff. And Jeff, you know what? You're a terrific treasure, but you're also very, very well centered. And one of the reasons you and I are good friends with Wayne Dyer. And Wayne died a few years ago. And I don't know if the people hearing this or watching this know that Wayne was living in Hawaii, and he got very famous on public television. And in his writings and appearances at the various churches with Marianne Williamson and even Dr. Jerry Jampolsky, they're all the they were the first responders to self-help.
Yes.
And I think Wayne Dyer, you and I met with Wayne. I think I introduced you to him or something at one time.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was going to say I will always be grateful to you for that opportunity. Not only did you call me to come on the radio with him, we did a show together, but also with Marianne Williamson to help her launch one of her books.
Yeah.
And I have pictures from that day. And after that, Wayne and I stayed in touch and we became friends. But it was all through you, because those people respected you so much. It was amazing that you get Wayne Dyer to come on and Marianne Williamson. They're like leading gurus in the field of consciousness. And I got to meet them both thanks to you. They're on my website. And I stayed in touch with Marianne for quite a while.
They're great. They were such good givers. You know, Wayne took care of Ram Dass in Maui because Ram had leukemia. And Ram Dass Ron is his name. He's a Jew from Long Island.
Right.
Gave himself that nice name. But, you know, he was a guru, and he had a lot of followers, but not in a cult religion. I mean, he was just very spiritually based and centered with the universe. I thought he was a terrific example of generosity and love. So the energy was right for me, because I'm attracted to that. And I had Wayne as a friend, but Wayne helped him in every way, even financially. But then Wayne got sick and died of it. And Ram Dass is well now, but you know, I mean, you never know. You don't know.
It was devastating to me when I heard that. He was such a nice man, and he's the guy that gave Deepak Chopra his start. He doesn't like to say it, but the story that I heard was that Wayne couldn't make it once to an event that he was supposed to be at, and he has Deepak to fill in for him. And Deepak, who is also so great, his career blew up from that, and went on to have an amazing career. He's still doing talks and all kinds of stuff. But Wayne was the father of that. He was a very influential man in the field of consciousness. And again, I'm very grateful to you for that opportunity. We spent an hour on the radio together on your show. Me and Wayne were the only guests that you had that day, talking about healing and consciousness and all kinds of good stuff. Same with Marianne Williamson. I don't remember that book, but her daughter was there with her that day too. They came to your studio, and we had a fantastic time.
What do we learn to do in spiritual walk? This is my favorite. Good becomes the enemy of best.
Well, let me tell you
Good
this.
in spiritual life, good becomes the enemy of best. It's a good meditation.
That's a very interesting saying. It led to my last two books. You know, all that work that I've been doing for the past over 24 years in my study of spirituality. It led to this recent book called Fight the Fear. I know I don't mean to bring it up before you, but when we're talking about consciousness and spirituality, I had 6 books, but most of them were all about comedy and celebrity compilations and, you know, man robs bank with his chin. But I wanted to, I wanted to write a meaningful book, something from myself. The other books were all through publishers who did absolutely nothing to promote the books. So I decided I was going to do a self-published book. And the first one I did became a bestseller on Amazon called Healing Your Heart by Changing Your Mind, a spiritual and humorous approach to achieving happiness.
Yeah.
And
No.
I got great reviews from psychiatrists and psychologists, and it's all about letting go of all the pains from our childhood, you know, from the time we're kids. Every time someone hurts your feelings or breaks a promise to you or hurts you in some way, it stays inside of you. It lodges in your heart chakra. And
Even a dentist.
even a dentist, exactly. That's why so many adults are afraid of the dentist, because it's what happened to them as children.
Now, wait a minute. You're going to tell your story here because of what happened to you with COVID, which led to your book. I was going to save it for, well, we're going to do it now.
I don't. Yeah, no, you do.
I
it
want
whenever you're
to.
ready.
I want to hear. No, wait. I want to hear that story. It's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable miracle. So what happened now?
Well,
Tell
what led
me
up
what
to all
happened.
this, I started writing about changing your thought. I stuttered very badly through my 20s and beyond. I stuttered so badly that I couldn't even say my name. I could
Right.
never say Gurian. Most stutterers have a hard time saying their name. And I started stuttering when I was about 7 years old. And it's a terrible burden to have. I hate when they joke about it in movies. They make fun of people who stutter, where you wouldn't do that with a person with another type of disability. It would be considered cruel. But they think it's funny to make fun of people who stutter for some reason. So when I got to college, I made myself run for the president of the school, telling myself if I could win the election, I wouldn't have to stutter anymore. And I couldn't say my name. I had other kids introduce me to kids I didn't know and ask them to vote for me. And I won the election. I was the president of the freshman class of Hunter College, and I still stuttered. And it was a great lesson. It taught me that outside validation doesn't work. It doesn't matter how many people tell you you're fantastic and wonderful. It matters what you think of yourself. So I worked on myself for years because I realized one day I didn't stutter when I was alone. I only stuttered when I was trying to talk to somebody else, which told me you can't have a disability based on your location, Joey. If a man has a limp, he limps in every room of his house. He can't go into a room and close the door and walk perfectly. But if I could speak fine when I'm alone, it means that it came from my head. I created a disability for myself. And any thought you create, you can uncreate. And so I worked on myself for years, and I developed techniques so I don't have to stutter anymore. And now as an avocation, I work with stutterers, and I teach them how not to stutter. So I'm very involved in learning how to change the way you think, especially in dealing with painful events in our lives, because unfortunately, trauma is more deeply ingrained in your consciousness than happy times. You know that bullshit saying they say when you're a kid, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never harm you?
That's not true.
You know how phony that is, right? Because all the bruises you got as a kid healed up a long time ago, but every one of us can remember something hurtful that someone said to hurt our feelings, right?
Yeah.
So that's the focus of my work, is healing on an emotional level to let go of uncomfortable thoughts. Now, it's very hard to examine your thoughts because we tend to believe our thoughts because we created them. And if you're smart, you think your thoughts are true. But it's like that saying, feelings aren't facts. Just because you think something doesn't mean it's true, because some of your thoughts were given to you by mean people who bullied you when you were a kid or who said mean things to you, and on some level you accepted that and you believed it on some hidden level. And those thoughts, it affects your self-esteem and your self-confidence, and it affects every decision you make in your life. And if your thoughts are not right, your decisions are not going to work out for you.
One of the big, well, you brought it up, and I want to further it before let's not let this escape. In the moment, with all of this black push that's going on right now, and I'm going to call it that. I don't know what other word to use, but the push right now to Black Lives Matter and everything that goes on with it. I want to say this: the core issue to me in my pea brain in figuring it out, which is very limited, is that we have had a civil war in this country between people who wanted slavery and those who didn't. And the ones who didn't won the war. But we're still facing the effects of those who still wanted it, and who were fighting for it. Now, in that process, they never educated the black people who were slaves in general. Some were educated, but when you're not educated, and you don't have a sense of history, and you don't have money, and it's a poverty issue, it creates low self-esteem. Absolutely. And that's what we're talking about here. The self-esteem is what we have to work on if we're going to work as in a therapeutic world. That's not how we live. We don't live in a therapeutic world. And I've said this before. This is not. I thought of it this week. It used to be art imitates life and life imitates art. Now it's really media imitates life and life imitates media. And I think one of the big dangerous things that's happened is people using their cameras there is nothing entertaining about homicide. It's not entertaining. It's not entertaining to watch someone be shot. It's not entertaining to watch anything that harms another person. That we've made it movies, we've made television.
Right. There are entire channels on YouTube that show people being shot and being stabbed. There are actually, someone sent me something the other day. I'm like, I don't even want that in my consciousness. I don't want to watch that. Gang members being shot. Horrible stuff exists on the internet. There are people who indulge in that. And it gets so many views. It's unbelievable. There's a real sickness in society. And that's what led to this other book called Fight the Fear. We're surrounded by fear and insecurity. Like you said, there's two things. There's Black Lives Matter as a statement and Black Lives Matter as a group. Two completely different things. No one would argue with the fact that Black Lives Matter as a statement. That's a given. The Black Lives Matter group has certain things that they want to propose that may not be comfortable with a lot of the country. So it's two different things, and it creates a lot of confusion for people who don't really look into it. But
all of this happened during a political year, unfortunately, because there's politics involved.
And during a pandemic. The
pandemic. Now, the pandemic, you got the virus.
Yeah, that was crazy. And I want to talk about that for a minute, because that was insane.
Let's hear about it, because that led to your next writing, which I'm subscribing to on Amazon right now.
Thank you.
So let's hear the story now. This is a great story.
I was sick for 2 months, and before I got sick, when I'm not performing, I'm covering the comedy scene. So I've been doing that for 20 years. I write columns and I cover and I support people and I write about their shows and their movies and whatever. And so 4 days before I got sick, I was at the comic strip with Ron Bennington from Sirius XM. I was doing a podcast and he was my guest. The next night, but people were already a little bit concerned. It was just me and Ron and my team. We didn't let anybody else in the club. People were already thinking about the virus. This is March 7th. And March 8th, I went to see Jerry Seinfeld at the 92nd Street Y. 600 people were packed into seats. Nobody social distancing yet. It was just a regular night out. The next night, I was out shooting videos for a project. We were going to different places. The virus was on people's minds. But again, nobody was wearing masks and nobody social distancing yet. That night, from what I've heard from people, 3 out of the 4 people that I was with came down with the virus. The next night, I went to a National Lampoon show the night before I got sick. And again, It had nothing to do with any of these shows because it could take 2 weeks until you show symptoms. So it could have been anything I did before. But I went to this show on the Lower East Side, and I was already nervous. I was supposed to go to a show before it, and I canceled because of the virus. They were already saying, try to stay out of crowds. But because the head of National Lampoon invited me, I felt that I wanted to go and support. So I didn't mix in the crowd. I stayed to myself. I did shake somebody's hand, though, which I thought about afterwards. And I also went to shop for food that night. There was a food store there, and I stocked up, not knowing that I was going to get sick the next day, and I was going to really need that food in the house. The next day, I started sneezing and coughing, and I thought it was just a cold. I didn't think virus yet. On the third day, it went to my throat, and it happened to be Friday the 13th.
Oh, boy.
And when I get a cold, it always goes to my throat, so I keep Z-Pack in the house.
Right.
Z-Pack is a very powerful drug, and it always works on me. And that was a miracle, because I not only had one course of it, I had 2 courses of it. It's usually 5 days. I stayed on it for 10 days while I continued getting sicker and sicker. I was nauseous from morning to night. I had full body pain. I had such chills. When I got these chills in the hospital, they had to put 4 blankets over me to try to stop me from shaking. I couldn't hold the glass. That's how bad these chills were. I was getting night sweats. Usually when you have night sweats, the fever breaks. But with this COVID virus, after the night sweats, the fever would come right back. There was nothing that I could take that would take away the nausea. And I kept saying, I don't know if I have the virus because I can still breathe. I didn't realize that the Z-Pack was saving my breathing. I had every other symptom. And 9 days, 10 days, 12. I'm like, how many days could I be sick? This should be going away. After 2 weeks, I couldn't take it anymore. I had called my doctor. He said to me, it sounds like you belong in the hospital. And I was afraid to go to the hospital because I have a heart condition. And at the time, New York was the epicenter of the virus. The hospitals were already being overloaded, and I was nervous to go to an emergency room because I know you can get even sicker by going to an emergency room. I waited, I don't know how I did it, Joey. I waited another 6 days from the time I called my doctor, and I couldn't take the pain anymore. By that time, I was bleeding from my nose. I had every symptom they had, and I didn't even have a good thermometer. I felt so stupid. I had an old-time thermometer. I called 911, and they interviewed me on the phone. They didn't just send an ambulance because they were overrun with calls. But when I told them all my symptoms and I told them about my medical history, my heart history, they said that we'll be right over. 2 men showed up by my door, and I want to give a tip to people. If you ever have to call an ambulance, I left my door open. Make sure your door's open, because if an ambulance crew comes and you can't get to the door to let them in, they have to break down your door. They don't have a way to get to you. So I knew that. So I left my door open, came upstairs with this big stretcher, and 2 men came up, fully gowned, masked, and the first act of kindness, this guy was so nice. He took my hand and he said to me, don't worry, you're going to be okay. And I can't tell you what that meant because I was so sick I could hardly move. I had to get dressed. I had to take a shower and get dressed. I couldn't even figure out what to wear to go to the hospital or what to take in a bag. I had to run to my computer and Google what to take to the hospital. I was so sick. I was very confused. I didn't know what to do. They put me on the stretcher. They put 2 masks on me and a gown, and they wheeled me out, and I asked them if they could take me to the hospital where my cardiologist was. And they said, it's too far away. We got to take you to the nearest hospital, which turned out to be a stroke of luck. They brought me to NYU Langone, and they wheeled me into the emergency room, and they put me in a cubicle next to a woman who was screaming. Now, I have to tell you, normal blood pressure is 120/80. At that point, my 80 had dropped to 42.
Wow.
My circulatory system was collapsing. They could hardly get into a vein to start an IV. And I'm so sick and I'm weak, and I'm next to a woman literally screaming with every breath. Every time she breathed out, she screamed. And I had to use the principles that were in my book. I had to take control of my mind because I knew that if you go to a negative place, your immune system drops.
Right.
It's very hard to stay healthy when you're in a negative space. So instead of feeling sorry for myself, I had to flip my thought and say how sick or scared this woman must be to be screaming with every breath, because I asked to be moved and there was no place that they could put me because they were putting people in the hallways already. They finally came and they did a chest x-ray and they did an ultrasound of my lungs, and a pulmonary specialist came to see me. I asked for a cardiologist, but there was none available. The pulmonary specialist came and he said, I have to tell you, you have COVID double pneumonia.
Oh my.
And it shook me. It really shook. I knew I was really sick, but when somebody tells you you have COVID double pneumonia, it's really shocking. And so they were actually debating whether to send me home. And I said, please, I can't go home. I'm alone. I can't do it anymore. I've been sick for 2 weeks already. They decided that they were going to keep me. It was a very tense moment. They put me in isolation. They wheeled me to a room, and I was in isolation for 2 days. And that's where they started me on hydroxychloroquine. It's so contagious that only one person was allowed in the room at the time, heavily gowned, heavily masked. I had to be masked the whole time. And they started me on hydroxychloroquine. Thank God they were using it. I was so relieved when they told me that they were going to give it to me. They started me on a double dose in the morning and a double dose at night. 400 milligrams in the morning, 400 at night. The usual dose is 200. But I got 800 the first day. And by the next day, I already started feeling a difference. They combined it with zinc sulfate, and they were using Z-Pak. But because I had been on it for 10 days, they didn't have to give it to me again.
Yeah, good.
And on the second day, they took out my oxygen, and my breathing stayed at 95 to 96%.
Now, you had 2 other people in the room.
3 other people. After my second day, they put me in a ward room. My first 2 days, I was alone in isolation. Wow. But because they needed the beds for sicker people. They just kept coming in. The staff was so overwhelmed. Nurses were telling me this is like a science fiction movie. And I want to emphasize the kindness, because that makes such a difference when you're so sick. I think when we're sick, when you're that sick, you revert to childhood in some way. You want somebody to be there with you, because all of this is alone. No family or friends can visit you. You're all by yourself and you're going through this. And a couple of nurses took the time to take my hand and sit on the bed, and they said to me, they encouraged me. They said, you're going to make it. You're going to be okay. But on the third day, they wheeled me into a room with 3 other very sick men, all with the virus. The man next to me was an elderly Chinese man who didn't speak English. And I had to call the nurse on his behalf because it sounded like he was dying. And he was coughing into the air with no mask. And I'm laying next to him. I'm laying right next to him. And there was no place that they could move me because there were no rooms. And I had to endure that for 2 days. All of us sharing one small bathroom. It was a nightmare. So when they said they were sending me home, at first I was nervous to go home. But after 2 days of that, I couldn't wait to go home, because they weren't sending me home because I was better. They were sending me home because I was stable enough to recuperate at home. And the support I got from the comedy community, I have to say that it really saved me. I was too weak to answer anybody. Ron Bennington announced it on Sirius XM that I was in the hospital with COVID pneumonia. And I started getting hundreds and hundreds of messages from people from all over the country. People that I didn't know, people that I knew. Famous people too, Bill Burr, Nick Kroll, and John Mulaney, Jim Norton, Bert Kreischer. They all sent me messages of hope, that they cared about me. And I can't tell you, I believe, and I know you do too, in the power of prayer and the power of thought. And when so many people are focusing their energy on one thing, I really think it has an effect. And I felt that it was strengthening me to know that so many people were pulling for me on my behalf, not only my family, but this community of comedians that I've been part of for decades. So they sent me home. They found an ambulance. It was hard for them to even get an ambulance to take me home. And they brought me home, and they wheeled me into my apartment. And when the ambulance attendees saw all the pictures, They wound up hanging out for about 20 minutes. They wound up asking me.
That's when they wanted it. That's when they wanted an autograph, Jeff.
They wanted to hang out. They asked me about Kevin Hart and Jerry Seinfeld and all these. And I was telling them stories until I got too weak. I said, look, I'm sorry, guys. I need to rest. I need to rest.
Oh, that's great.
You know, it took me another 6 weeks, Joey, to get better. Because after I was home, I got pleurisy. I got an inflammation of the lungs.
Oh.
And then all my glands swelled up. This virus is a beast. It's a nightmare. And I was just so lucky. It was God's grace that I survived. And then I got the hydroxychloroquine. And I got the Z-Pack. And I was taken to the right hospital. Everything is synchronicity. It could always go another way. And I'm very aware of that. So I wrote this book while I was in quarantine. I've been in the house for basically 6 months. I wrote 2 books while I was home. And I could only publish one at a time. This book is Fight the Fear, Overcoming Obstacles That Stand in Your Way. I don't even have a copy yet to hold up because it just launched.
Well, I signed up for it, and you can buy it online, but there's no hard paper copy yet.
There is. There is. It's available, but the link that I sent you.
It's only $20. I mean, you know, the thing is $2 for the if you want to use the Kindle. But you know, I mean, it's no big deal for $20. This is a great book. But let me say something to you.
Go ahead.
You know, we don't often do this in our own community. One of the great people who was very generous and went through much of the pain in a different way was Jerry Lewis. You know, he got a bad reputation for ego and a lot of things that people said about him. But when it all came down to medical and people needed help, he suffered a lot. He had tremendous help from the medical community because he was involved in the charities of raising money for the kids. But, you know, he also was very generous with the doctors, with all of us guys, you know, and women. He was very good with that. I don't know if you acknowledge that or not. Or, you know, Jerry could be tough.
I'll tell you something. I wrote for Jerry when he was roasted by the Friars Club. I had the honor of being with him a lot, just the two of us in his hotel room. And while I was with him, he got a call that they found the gene that caused the Duchenne form of muscular dystrophy.
Right.
And tears were running down his face. He started crying, and I was alone with him just to share that moment. I couldn't believe that. And we became friends. I saw him a long time. In his later years, you know, he did have a reputation for not being friendly to people, but it depends on how you meet somebody. I was sent to him by Bob Sachs, by the producer of The Roast. So he was very nice to me. And we worked together, and I visited him in Vegas a couple of years. Actually, matter of fact, me and Pat Cooper went to see him together. When he was,
you know, he helped Pat with his hearing. You know, he got him.
I didn't know that.
This guy helped everybody. That's what I'm trying to say.
He was he was a very special guy until he got older. He got a little meaner in his later years. But when I was with him, he actually had me write for him for an event he was doing with Sammy Davis. He goes, me and Sammy are friends for 40 years, and we've never done a show together, and I want you to write jokes for that. And I did. It was amazing. So it was very exciting to me, and he was a very special guy. Very special guy. They named the Friars Club after him. They had a big ceremony there. They named the monastery after him, and I was there that night. People in the room.
I've been involved in a lot of the Friars activities through the years, and, you know, from Soupy Sales to Mickey Freeman and all the Golden Boys, you know.
All the greats.
Yeah, and I am so privileged, whether it was Sid Bernstein or Les Paul never joined the Friars, but, you know, the entertainers are great. I want to mention one other person, Charlie Colello. Charlie was he was another one, was a great guy, and these are genuine givers. And there still is the givers and the takers. Whether we want to point them out or not is a whole other story. It's personal choice. But there are givers and there are takers. And we have had so many generous people. And I notice now there's a tendency for celebrities to tie themselves into a charity so they can promote something. But they do it for PR, not for the reasons like even Marlon Brando really did want the Indians to have help. You know, before
it was a different generation, Joey.
Yeah, I know.
What's sad about it, that generation, they thought very differently. That's why I said
know.
I feel blessed that I got to know those guys from what they call the golden age of comedy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now, before we leave here, I want to plug your book because I want everybody to know to your website and your book, or at least people who are listening and looking at me. You know, this is one you don't want to miss, and I never say that. I don't ever say that because it's selling, you know. But it's because of you and the person you are and the work that you've done and what you've done for everybody else. And I think that you are less celebrated. And you need to be really honored and celebrated, but you never sought the spotlight. I'm not saying that. I think you always you like to be behind the scenes, but you also like a little bow. But you know what?
Of course.
But you're a terrific giver, and I believe that people, when they experience you, they're going to not ever forget you. And now, anyway, let's go with this book.
Well, my goal has always been to put positive energy out to the universe, and that's what these two books are. I call them, it's part of the happiness series. The book is called Fight the Fear, Overcoming Obstacles That Stand in Your Way. And it's about all the fears that I've had to overcome, from stuttering, fear of traveling, ADD, and confusion. Everything that I do, there's hardly anything that's comfortable for me. And people say I've been able to accomplish a lot of things, and it's because I've had to fight the fear. Fear is a bully, and it wants you to accomplish nothing. And every day I do things that make me uncomfortable. I went to Japan all alone. I fight my fears of traveling. Things that other people can do comfortably, I feel I must also be able to do. And so the book is an inspirational and motivational book, because so many people right now are living in insecurity and fear. We don't know what's happening. We've never experienced anything like this. The country is in chaos, and it happens to be a very timely book. It just launched yesterday. It's already the #1 release on Amazon. I have all 5-star reviews already. People have written amazing stuff. If you look on the Amazon page, you look at the reviews, you can see what people wrote. Really incredible stuff. And I got great reviews from people like Judith Regan, the publisher, and Tim Sabian, radio legend, and who created the Howard Stern channels, and Evan Shapiro, the head of National Lampoon, wrote a rave review. So again, it's called Fight the Fear, Overcoming Obstacles That Stand in Your Way, and it's available as an ebook and a paperback. But the ebook is on special. It's only $2.99 because I wanted everyone to be able to afford it, because I think it's a message that needs to get out there. And I thank you for letting me do that. And my website is comedymatterstv.com. And I have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/comedymatterstv, that's got over 2.2 million views, with interviews with every comedian that you love, from Jimmy Fallon on down. And on Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Jeffrey Gurian. That's about it.
That's great. All right, Jeff. Well, thank you.
Sure.
You really influenced me. I'm drinking bold ginger ale, and I have wooden teeth. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you, Joey. We have a long history, and it's always great to be on with you. We always have fun together, and I really thank you. Thank you so much. You're a legend.
Well, I love you, and you're great. And so I'm so happy that you stayed healthy. So happy. God bless you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. God bless you too, Joey. Take care. Be well.
Let a smile be your umbrella, but don't get a mouthful of rain.